Remember when a little quiet town in Maine somehow ended up with one of the highest murder rates on Earth? That town was Cabot Cove, and somehow one woman was present for almost every single case. That woman was Jessica Fletcher. Premiering on CBS in 1984 and running for 12 seasons until 1996, Murder, She Wrote followed Fletcher, played by Angela Lansbury, a mystery writer living in the small coastal town of Cabot Cove, Maine, who had an extraordinary talent for solving crimes and an equally extraordinary talent for being in the immediate vicinity when they happened. Keeping her company was Sheriff Amos Tupper, played by Tom Bosley, and Dr. Seth Hazlitt, played by William Wyndham, two men who apparently never once sat down to discuss the pattern they were all living inside. Today we're counting down 15 weird facts about Murder, She Wrote you probably never knew. Stick around for number 1, because by the end of this, you'll realize the show wasn't just a network institution. It was a full family operation running quietly behind one television's most recognizable typewriters. Before we get into it, hit that like button and subscribe. It helps YouTube put this in front of more classic TV fans who'd want to see it. All right, who's ready to solve a murder? Number 15, the show accidentally launched half of Hollywood. Watching Murder, She Wrote is a genuinely disorienting experience, and not because of the murder plots. It's because roughly every third episode features someone you now know extremely well, when they were still just trying to hit their mark without getting accused of manslaughter in coastal Maine. The list is almost unfair. Joaquin Phoenix, credited as Leaf Phoenix, showed up at age 10 in the season 1 episode We're Off to Kill the Wizard. George Clooney rolled in during 1987 for No Laughing Murder, playing a young man trying to marry the daughter of his father's feuding former comedy partner. 2 ex-teammates with a grudge, a pending wedding, and absolutely no interest in keeping the peace. Bryan Cranston appeared 3 separate times, most memorably in Season 2 as a tennis tournament organizer's fiancé who borrows his girlfriend's car to run an errand and gets blown up for his trouble, which, in hindsight, is a deeply funny footnote in the career of the future Walter White. Courtney Cox played Jessica's grandniece in a Season 3 two-parter called Death Stalks the Big Top in 1986, a solid 8 years before anyone knew what Central Perk was. Neil Patrick Harris turned up in Season 9 as Jessica's grocery delivery boy and aspiring writer who gets wrongly accused of murder, fresh off Doogie Howser and clearly determined to remind everyone he could do more than play a teenage doctor. The show became an unlikely pipeline. Future A-listers all around, and Jessica Fletcher in the middle of all of it. Number 14, Cabot Cove had a higher murder rate than a war zone. Cabot Cove, Maine had a population of roughly 3,500 people, a gorgeous coastline that makes you want to move there immediately, right up until you look at what was happening to the locals. Over 12 seasons, approximately 60 murders were tied to that one picturesque little town. Researchers for BBC Radio 4's More or Less sat down, ran the numbers, and came up with an annual murder rate of about 149 per 100,000 residents. That's roughly 60% higher than Honduras when it held the real-world title and approximately 17 times the U.S. national average at the time. By the end of the series, roughly 2% of Cabot Cove's entire population had been wiped out. Fans eventually coined a term for it, Cabot Cove Syndrome. The running joke is that the victims were mostly tourists and summer visitors, not year-round locals, which is a generous interpretation that still ends up with a stack of bodies on a postcard-perfect Maine coastline. And then there's Jessica Fletcher, who managed to be in the general vicinity of every single one of those deaths. The producers eventually relocated her to New York City, which they framed as a storytelling choice. If Jessica Fletcher ever showed up on your doorstep with a smile and a warm dish of something homemade, the smart move was to fake a family emergency, get in the car, and drive until you hit Canada. Number 13, the show played fair, and you could beat it. Most mystery shows in the 1980s operated on a simple premise. Murder, She Wrote ran a different operation entirely. The show was built on fair play mystery, a tradition with actual rules, most famously codified by writer Ronald Knox in 1929, which established that the killer must appear early, the clues must be visible, and the solution must be reachable by a careful viewer before the detective gets there. The writers were also working with 2 techniques they deployed consistently enough that a regular viewer would eventually catch on. First, the camera had a habit of lingering on an unremarkable object, a misplaced item, an odd detail sitting in the background, for just a beat too long. That was the clue. Second, the casting worked deliberately against expectation. The aggressive, visibly suspicious guest star with the obvious motive and the confrontational energy was innocent. The quiet, sympathetic one in the background who seemed like a supporting character is where you start paying closer attention. The red herring strategy ran deep. Producers regularly cast actors known for playing tough guys and villains, giving the audience exactly the face they expected to see on a killer, while the actual murderer turned out to be the nervous accountant, the grieving widow, or the friendly neighbor nobody thought twice about. In any given episode, at least 3 people had a perfectly legitimate reason to want the victim gone. The real question was always opportunity, and the answer was usually sitting in a detail the camera had already shown you, while you were busy suspecting the wrong person. Number 12. The most traveled detective never had a driver's license. Jessica Fletcher traveled constantly. She crossed the country, solved murders on multiple continents, and turned up at crime scenes with a reliability that should have more local law enforcement deeply suspicious. She did all of it without ever once getting behind the wheel of a car. No driver's license, no vehicle. The most well-traveled amateur detective in television history got around on foot, by bicycle, or in somebody else's passenger seat. And that last option turned out to be the most useful of the three. Lansbury herself told the LA Times she wasn't entirely sure of the original reasoning. Her exact words were, "She did not drive a car, I don't know why, but she came to appreciate it thoroughly. Her explanation was straightforward. Not driving precludes, in a sense, the need for car chases. We have enough of them. There are enough shows that do very, very exciting car chases." What the producers understood equally well was that putting Jessica in someone else's car was one of the most elegant interrogation setups on television. While the rest of the television landscape was screeching tires and running red lights to generate excitement, Murder, She Wrote was solving the case from the passenger seat. Number 11. Every outdoor scene in Maine was shot in California. The show's producers needed a stand-in for rural New England and landed on Mendocino, a Northern California town with Victorian architecture and a rugged coastline that could pass for the Northeast if you didn't look too carefully at the vegetation. It was also significantly cheaper than actually going to Maine. The Blair House Inn in Mendocino became Jessica's house. Noyo Harbor in Fort Bragg, a few miles north, handled most of the dockside scenes. For roughly 9 episodes across the entire run, the production filmed on location there and gathered enough stock footage to sustain the illusion for years afterward. Then they went back to Los Angeles and stayed there. The Northern California coast, it turns out, has weather opinions. Heavy fog rolling in mid-scene, winds strong enough to wreck outdoor dialogue, rain delays that nobody scheduled. The elements were not cooperating with a network production timeline. So for the remaining episodes across a 264-episode run, Cabot Cove was reconstructed on the Universal Studios backlot, specifically around the Jaws Lake area, the same one on the same studio tram tour, with a Victorian house relocated to a nearby hill to stand in for Jessica's home whenever the script called for it. The backlot solved the weather problem, but introduced a different one. California has palm trees, and palm trees have no interest in pretending to be Maine. They appear in the background of multiple Cabot Cove scenes throughout the series, clearly visible and absolutely ruining the geography for anyone paying attention. The production team didn't always catch them in time, and once you know to look, they are extremely difficult to unsee. Number 10. The show's name changed almost everywhere. Murder, She Wrote went global, and somewhere along the way, the rest of the world looked at the title and decided to take it in a completely different direction. Italy got there first with the most elegant reframe. The Italian title, La Signora in Giallo, The Lady in Yellow, which sounds arbitrary until you know that giallo is the Italian word for the entire mystery and crime genre, a term that traces back to a Mondadori book series launched in 1929 featuring distinctive bright yellow colors. Germany took a more biographical approach. The show first aired as Immer wenn sie Krimis schrieb, whenever she wrote crime novels, which sounds less like a title and more like something a concerned neighbor might say. They eventually landed on Mord ist ihr Hobby, or Murder is Her Hobby. France went with arabesque, referencing the intricate interlacing patterns of a mystery plot and making the whole enterprise sound considerably more elegant than a show with a weekly body count probably deserves. Japan titled it Jessica Obasan no Jikinbo, Aunt Jessica's Case Files, framing her as a warm, approachable maternal figure who also happens to process crime scenes before lunch. Sweden contributed Mord och ena visor, a play on the idiom Ord och ena visor, meaning a stern talking to or a straight talk. So the Swedish title is essentially calling Jessica Fletcher the person who shows up and sets everyone straight, which tracks perfectly. Spain kept the literary parallel intact with Se ha escrito un crimen, a crime has been written, clean, direct, and structurally mirroring the original. Same show, same Jessica. Countries looked at all that and came back with 12 completely different personalities for it. Number 9. Jessica Fletcher was modeled after a real person, just not who you'd think. Jessica Fletcher didn't arrive out of thin air. The creators of Murder, She Wrote were devoted Agatha Christie fans who set out to fill a very specific gap. The American television landscape had no amateur sleuth worth talking about, and they intended to fix that. The Miss Marple comparison is obvious the moment you look at it. The DNA is right there on the surface. But Levinson and Link weren't trying to transplant Miss Marple to New England. Their stated goal was something more specific. They wanted to model Jessica on Agatha Christie herself. That distinction changed everything about how the character could function. Producer Peter Fisher also made a deliberate choice about how Jessica moved through the world. She jogged, she rode her bicycle around Cabot Cove, She was physically active in a way that primetime television rarely bothered with for women of her age in 1984. And Fisher built that in from the beginning, specifically because he wanted a character who reflected how actual people in their 50s and 60s were living. Christie gave them the blueprint. The upgrade was making Jessica someone who didn't wait for the mystery to find her, even though, statistically, it always did anyway. Number 8. Angela Lansbury was actually the third choice. Angela Lansbury as Jessica Fletcher is one of those pairings that feels so inevitable, it's almost hard to believe it came within 2 phone calls of never happening. The producer's first call went to Jean Stapleton. Fresh off 9 years as Edith Bunker on All in the Family, Stapleton was the top choice, and she was interested right up until she wasn't. She'd recently lost her husband, had reservations about how the character was written, and had absolutely zero appetite for locking herself into another long-running series. She passed. Call number 2 went to Doris Day. Box office legend, Hollywood royalty. Doris Day also said no. At this point, the producers had struck out twice with 2 of the biggest names they could have possibly called. So they turned to Angela Lansbury, who they believed was perfect for the role, but genuinely weren't sure would show any interest in doing a television series at all. She said yes, and then she got to work. Jean Stapleton and Doris Day both had perfectly good reasons for passing. They just accidentally handed Angela Lansbury one of the defining roles in the history of American television. So it's hard to feel too bad about it. Quick pause. If you're enjoying this one, hit that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment below. Did you ever actually solve the case before Jessica revealed it? All right, back to Cabot Cove. Number 7, she studied real writers to build the role. Angela Lansbury didn't walk onto the Murder, She Wrote set and wing it. From day one, she had a very specific idea of who Jessica Fletcher was, and she was not going to let anyone talk her out of it. Lansbury was deliberate about every detail of how Jessica moved through the world, the way she tilted her head when something didn't add up, the way she asked questions that sounded casual and weren't, the way she clocked the detail everyone else walked right past. All of it was constructed carefully, from the outside in. She said her goal was to never let the audience down, and she meant it. Anytime a script pushed Jessica toward being out of touch, eccentric in the wrong way, or condescending, Lansbury pushed back. Her exact words to producers, "We've got to keep her credibility high." And once she built the character, she was not about to let anyone dismantle her. She clashed seriously with co-creator Peter Fisher over workload, pay, and the direction Jessica was heading. Disputes significant enough that she came close to walking away entirely after season 5. Instead of walking, she formalized her position. She came in to play a mystery writer. She left, having run the whole investigation. Number 6. Jessica Fletcher's last name was a tribute hidden in plain sight. Jessica Fletcher's full name was Jessica Beatrice Fletcher, maiden name McGill. That last part was a direct tribute to Angela Lansbury's mother, the Belfast-born Irish actress who spent her career performing under the professional name Moina McGill. Moina McGill worked steadily in West End theater and appeared in several films, including 3 alongside her daughter, National Velvet in 1944, The Picture of Dorian Gray in 1945, and Kind Lady in 1951. She was a working character actress rather than a marquee name, but she was her daughter's mother, and Lansbury quietly folded that into the character she'd been playing for 12 seasons. Every time Jessica's maiden name came up on screen, the tribute was right there, completely unannounced. The show eventually pushed the McGill connection further by introducing Emma McGill, Jessica's identical British cousin, also played by Lansbury, who first appeared in the season 2 episode Sing a Song of Murder and returned in the season 4 episode It Runs in the Family. That second appearance holds a specific distinction. It is the only episode across the entire run of Murder, She Wrote in which Jessica Fletcher does not appear at all. Lansbury showed up, did the work, and her most famous character technically had the episode off. Lansbury built her personal history into the role at every available opportunity, and never once called attention to any of it. Number 5. Lansbury secretly saved careers nobody else would touch. By the early 1990s, Lansbury's production company was co-producing the series with Universal, and she eventually became executive producer for the final 4 seasons. Once she became executive producer, Lansbury made a consistent practice of casting veteran performers from Hollywood's golden age. The working theory, well supported by the pattern, was that many of these performers needed SAG qualifying hours to maintain their union medical coverage, and a guest role in Cabot Cove solved that problem in a single episode. The most documented case involves actress Madeline, who had multiple sclerosis and was at risk of losing her SAG medical coverage due to insufficient earnings. When Lansbury found out, she created a recurring character for her and brought her back every 3 or 4 episodes. Lansbury never made a formal on-record statement framing any of this as deliberate policy, which is exactly the kind of thing someone does when they're not interested in credit. The people who worked around her noticed anyway. The set reflected the same sensibility. Murder, She Wrote developed a reputation as one of the warmest working environments in Hollywood. Jessica Fletcher spent every episode making sure killers faced consequences. The woman playing her spent 12 years making sure her colleagues didn't get left behind. One of those things got a lot more screen time than it deserved. Number 4, CBS canceled it, but couldn't make it go away. Murder, She Wrote wrapped its 12-season run in 1996, and CBS promptly discovered that America was not finished with Jessica Fletcher. 4 TV movies followed between 1997 and 2003. The first, South by Southwest in 1997, put Jessica on a train where she crossed paths with a witness to a murder connected to a classified government satellite code. A Story to Die For in 2000 dropped her into a writers' conference where a former KGB officer turned up dead, because literary events were no safer than coastal Maine. The Last Free Man in 2001 went considerably deeper. Jessica uncovered a connection between her own family history and a Civil War-era murder in the Old South. Then, The Celtic Riddle in 2003 sent her to Ireland for a will reading that turned fatal, closing out the film run by confirming that no legal proceeding anywhere on the planet was safe either. Cabot Cove's surviving residents were presumably relieved. The franchise didn't stop there. In 2009, Legacy Interactive released a Murder, She Wrote hidden object mystery game featuring 5 original cases set across Cabot Cove, Vermont, and England. A sequel followed in 2012 with 3 more. Neither game used the original cast's voices, though the likenesses of Angela Lansbury, William Wyndham, and Ron Mossick were used throughout. Most shows from that era got reruns if they were lucky. Murder, She Wrote got movies, video games, and 3 additional decades of being impossible to get fully rid of. Number 3. Lansbury almost quit, and the show hoped no one would notice. By August 1988, heading into season 5, Lansbury was 62 years old and publicly exhausted. The specific trigger was a change from a 7-day to an 8-day shooting schedule per episode, which translated to being essentially always in production. CBS and the producers found a solution, and it was creative if nothing else. Starting in season 6 and running through season 7, the show introduced a rotating cast of surrogate sleuths who carried the main mystery while Lansbury appeared in bookend segments. The characters filling the middle were Dennis Stanton, a charming former jewel thief played by Keith Mitchell, Harry McGraw, a gruff private investigator played by Jerry Orbach, and Michael Haggerty, a suave MI6 agent played by Len Cariou. Perfectly capable characters, professionally executed. Ratings for those episodes ran lower than the standard format. People were not watching Murder, She Wrote for the procedural framework or the coastal Maine atmosphere. They were watching for Angela Lansbury, and a version of the show where she appeared for roughly 4 minutes per episode was not an adequate substitute regardless of how charming the replacement was. The experiment wound down. Lansbury came back to center stage, where she remained through the end of the run. The audience had essentially conducted a controlled experiment on what the show was worth without its lead, and the results were unambiguous. Number 2, CBS killed its own show on purpose. For 11 years, Murder, She Wrote was a staple television. It had reliable ratings and a fiercely loyal audience. It was the television equivalent of a sure thing. And then CBS got creative. In 1995, the network pulled the show from its regular spot and moved it to Thursday nights, putting it directly in the path of NBC's must-see TV lineup, which at that particular moment meant going head-to-head with Friends in its second season. Ratings collapsed almost immediately. Nearly 6 million viewers vanished in a single season. People who either couldn't find the show in its new home or had already planted themselves on NBC's couch for the night and weren't moving. The network was candid enough about the reasoning, at least. The Thursday move was framed as an attempt to give CBS a viable alternative to NBC, while Sundays got handed over to younger skewing programming as part of a demographic overhaul. Basically, CBS decided it needed hipper Sunday nights and used a weekday slot as a graceful way to phase Jessica Fletcher out. It was not graceful. After 12 seasons, the show was done. Not because the audience had moved on, but because CBS put one of its most dependable franchises directly in front of an oncoming train and called it a strategy. Number 1, the final seasons were a family business. By the time Murder, She Wrote hit its final stretch, Angela Lansbury was running a family business, and she had the org chart to prove it. Peter Shaw, her husband, co-founded Corey Moore Productions in 1987. The company eventually began co-producing the series with Universal, which meant that by the time Lansbury formally took over as executive producer for the final 4 seasons, seasons 9 through 12, covering 1992 to 96, the Lansbury-Shaw family held both the creative and business controls simultaneously. The show's finances and its creative direction were being managed from essentially the same household. Her son, Anthony Pullen Shaw, directed 68 episodes across the run. Her stepson, David Shaw, Peter's son from a previous marriage, came up through the production as a producer, eventually serving in the show's final seasons and as executive producer on several of the TV movies that followed. Her brother, Bruce Lansbury, contributed as a producer and writer across the run. The result was a show that maintained its tone, its consistency, and its identity across 12 seasons and 264 episodes in an era when most long-running series had visibly lost the thread by year 8. And there you have it, 15 weird and wild facts about Murder, She Wrote. Which one surprised you the most? Drop it in the comments and share this with someone who you know has spent hours on their couch solving crimes with their good buddy Jessica. Don't forget to ring that bell. Until next time, this is Remember When.